former Navi SEAL's dog stopped him at the edge of a summer lake and led him straight to a missing girl hiding in the reeds.
Hey,
She was
easy.
freezing, injured, and clutching a
Are
rusted
you alone out here?
box,
Yes.
while begging him not
Please
to take
don't
her
take
to the
my
North
box.
Dock. Inside that box was a hidden clue that exposed a secret powerful people in town wanted buried. What began as a rescue turned into a fight for truth, a child's life, and an entire town's conscience. If this story moves you, tell me where you're watching from, or leave your thoughts after listening. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subs so I can keep writing more stories like this. By the time the sun cleared the pines, the lake had already turned to glass. Northern Minnesota in early summer had a way of making a man forget his own history for a few minutes at a time. The water lay blue and clean. The shoreline smelled of wet earth and pine resin, and the air still carried a trace of cold left behind by the thaw. It was beautiful in the same way a hymn could be beautiful, simple on the surface, deeper if a person stayed long enough to listen. Silas Rowan did not often stay still long enough. He drove an old, dull red pickup down the gravel access road with the windows cracked, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. He was 37, tall, about 6 feet even, and built like a man who had spent years using strength as a tool instead of a performance. His body was lean and compact, strong through the shoulders and legs, the kind of practical muscle that came from carrying weight, kneeling on hard ground, and moving fast when moving. Fast mattered. His face was clean-shaven, always. No beard, no stubble. The habit was old and deliberate. Without it, his features looked sharper. A square jaw, pronounced cheekbones, a straight nose that had once been broken and healed slightly off-center. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, neat but a little longer than regulation, and the skin of his face and neck was fair under the northern light, but wind-browned from long days near the water. His eyes were gray-blue, clear, steady, and watchful in the way of someone who had trained himself to notice exits before scenery. He wore the same clothes he wore most workdays, an old tactical combat shirt in faded olive gray, softened by years of washing and weather, frayed lightly at the cuffs and shoulders, worn combat pants in earth brown with kneecaps gone pale from use, heavy old work boots, and a scuffed military watch that kept better time than most people he knew. In the passenger seat sat a coil of rope, a tool, bag, and a thermos of coffee gone lukewarm. In the back, alert but calm, was Alder. Alder, his German shepherd, was 4 or 5 years old, yellow-black coated, broad-chested without being bulky, all efficient lines and contained power. His black saddle ran dark and clean along his back, while his chest and legs were a warm gold brown that brightened in the morning light. One ear, his left, had a small notch at the edge, the kind of mark that made him easier to recognize and harder to forget. He wore a dark brown leather collar, old but well cared for, the metal buckle dulled by time. Alder's eyes were intelligent, amber brown, and rarely idle. He was not a nervous dog, not a noisy dog. He moved like he was always listening to something farther away than the average person could hear. Silas parked near the shoreline where a rescue skiff sat tilted on a trailer, still streaked with dried lake mud from the day before. A tourist had taken it too close to the rocks. No one had been hurt, just fiberglass damage, a bent mount, and paperwork. The kind of problem Silas liked. Visible, solvable, and silent. He stepped out, scanned the tree line, the road, the lake, then the mirrored windows of a parked ranger truck farther up. Habit, not fear exactly. Just the body remembering what the mind preferred not to revisit, "Come on, buddy," he said. Alder jumped down and landed softly beside him. At first, everything looked ordinary. The dog trotted a few steps ahead while Silas walked toward the skiff with a wrench in hand. The reeds along the shallows stirred. A gull cried. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a woodpecker hammered at a trunk with mechanical persistence. Then Alder slowed. Silas noticed it without looking directly at him. The dog's head lowered, ears rose. His gait changed from casual patrol to deliberate tracking. He drifted left, nose cutting through the air in short, measured pulls. Silas stopped walking. "Alder." The dog did not look back. He moved another 10 feet toward a stretch of reeds and scrub willow near a muddy inlet, then suddenly turned and stood across Silas's path. Not lunging, not barking, blocking. His body was firm, tail low, weight forward, every muscle tight with warning. Silas felt something old and cold move through his chest. Alder only did that when he caught a scent pattern he associated with human distress. Fear, sweat, blood, panic, danger. It was not magic. It was training and instinct and memory layered together. But in moments like this, it could feel like prophecy. Silas crouched slightly. "Show me." Alder pivoted at once and moved into the reeds. Silas followed, boots sinking into soft shoreline mud. Branches brushed his sleeves. The smell changed. Lake water, rotting leaves, wet clay, then sharpened with something else. Human, young, cold. A child's jacket hung from a forked willow branch, caught by one sleeve and fluttering faintly in the wind. Pale blue, muddy at the hem. Silas's pulse kicked once, hard. "Alder." The dog pushed farther in, weaving along the edge of the mudflat. Silas nearly missed the shape at first because it was so still. A small figure curled beside the reeds, half on wet ground, half on an old patch of drift debris. A girl, maybe 11. Soaked through, one sneaker missing, scrapes along both shins, mud on her hands. Her arms wrapped around a rusted tin box like it was the last solid thing in the world. Her eyes flew open when Silas reached her. They were large, gray-blue in the morning light, and full of the kind of terror that did not start today. "It's okay," Silas said immediately, lowering his voice. "You're okay. I'm not going to grab you." She flinched anyway, pressing backward into the reeds. Then Alder did something Silas had seen him do only with frightened animals, and once with a veteran in a grocery store parking lot who had dropped to the pavement at the sound of a backfiring truck. He lay down, not close enough to crowd her. Just a few feet away, chest to the mud, head lowered, eyes on the girl but soft, ears forward, a deliberate offering of calm. The girl stared at him. Her breathing, fast and shallow, began to slow by degrees. Silas stayed where he was, one knee in the mud. "My name is Silas. That's Alder. Can you tell me your name?" The girl swallowed. Her lips were pale from cold. "Iris." "Okay, Iris. Good. You're doing good." He glanced at the box in her arms. "Can you stand if I help you?" She looked at Alder first, not him. Alder stayed still. Then she gave the smallest nod. Silas moved carefully, telegraphing every motion. When his hand touched her forearm, she tensed so hard he felt it in her bones. Too cold, too scared, too used to bracing. He got her on her feet. She was lighter than she should have been, all angles and shaking muscle. Her hair, dark blonde or light brown, hard to tell under the mud and water, hung in wet ropes around a thin face freckled across the nose. She wore a soaked hoodie under the missing jacket, jeans caked with shoreline muck, and one untied sneaker that squelched with every step. "Truck's close," he said. "We're getting you warm." She clutched the tin box tighter. Don't take it. I won't. That answer seemed to matter. Silas wrapped Iris in an old wool blanket from the truck and turned the heat on high. Alder jumped in beside her but did not touch her, just sat braced and watchful, his shoulder angled toward the door as if making a wall. Iris kept glancing at him, as though checking whether he was still real. Silas called in for basic medical guidance from the volunteer rescue line instead of local law enforcement. A habit of caution formed from too many years watching the wrong person arrive first. He reported finding a hypothermic minor near the East Inlet and said he was taking her to his cabin to warm her while awaiting next steps. As he drove, he watched the rearview mirror and side roads without seeming to. The old battlefield habits sat inside him like old nails, embedded, mostly harmless, still sharp if pressed. He told himself this was a found child situation, a rescue. He knew how to do rescue. He did not tell himself that his heart had not settled since Alder blocked his path. Halfway back to the cabin, with the truck heater rattling warm air and Iris wrapped in 2 blankets, Alder suddenly rose from his seat and planted himself between Silas and the rear window. His ears locked forward, his nose lifted. Then, in total silence, he stared hard through the glass at the road behind them. Silas checked the mirror. There was no car, no truck, no visible movement, just a strip of gravel, pines, and sunlight. But Alder did not sit down. For 3 long seconds, the dog held that rigid, listening posture, like he had heard a name spoken in a language made of wind and memory. Then he exhaled, turned, and rested his muzzle lightly against Iris's knee. The girl's eyes filled with tears for the first time. "He knows," she whispered. Silas's hands tightened on the wheel. "Knows what?" But Iris only shook her head and looked out the window, and the truck rolled on toward the cabin under a sky so bright it almost hurt to look at. Silas's cabin sat east of town, tucked between birch and pine on a rise above a narrow stretch of shoreline. It was plain, practical, and well kept. 1 main room, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, wood stove, tool shelves, and windows placed for visibility before aesthetics. The kind of home built by someone who valued function first and had learned to let comfort arrive slowly. Inside, Iris stood just past the doorway, dripping lake water onto the old plank floor, still holding the rusted box. "Bathroom's there," Silas said, keeping his tone gentle. "I'll get towels. You can lock the door." That earned him another quick look, suspicious, measuring, older than her face should have been. He gave her a dry flannel shirt and sweatpants with the drawstring tied small, then turned away while she changed. By the time she came back out, her wet hair combed roughly with her fingers, some color had returned to her cheeks. She was still trembling, but less violently. Silas set a bowl of soup on the table. Chicken broth, vegetables, too much pepper. He apologized for the pepper. Iris did not answer. Alder went to lie down beside her chair and placed 1 paw forward, touching the edge of her sneaker. Iris watched him for a moment, then took the spoon. She ate like someone trying not to be hungry. Silas made coffee he did not need and sat across from her, not asking questions for several minutes. Interrogation could wait. Warmth first, food first. Let the nervous system remember the room. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. "Do you know your last name, Iris?" A pause. "Bell." "Okay." Hugh nodded once. "You're safe here for now." At that, she looked up sharply, and he saw something in her expression shift. Not trust, not yet, but the painful surprise of hearing a sentence she wanted to believe. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke again. "Don't call the old station." Silas held still. "What old station?" She swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the spoon. "North Dock, the old one. Don't call anyone there." Her eyes flicked toward the window as if expecting to see someone standing beyond it. "And don't call the people by the North Pier." Silas felt the shape of a problem forming just out of view. "I hear you," he said. "No one from the North Dock." That seemed to cost her everything she had left. She set the spoon down and curled sideways in the chair, then let Silas guide her to the couch. Alder followed and lay on the floor beside it. Iris's hand dropped over the edge of the cushion until her fingers found the fur at the back of his neck. She was asleep in less than a minute. Silas stood there for a while, watching the rise and fall of her shoulders. Children asleep should not look like they are still listening for danger. The day moved toward evening. He made a few careful calls, none detailed, checked the locks, pulled the curtains halfway, and walked the perimeter once with Alder before dusk. The dog remained focused, calm, but unusually attentive to the road and the wind off the lake. Night settled softly. Tree shadows stretched across the floorboards. The cabin creaked in familiar places. Iris slept on the couch under a quilt. Alder chose the spot directly in front of the living room doorway and refused every quiet command to move to his mat. He lay there facing both the girl and the front windows, like a sentry who had selected his post. The rusted tin box sat on the coffee table where Iris had placed it before falling asleep. Twice, maybe 3 times, Silas noticed Alder look at the box, then at him. The first time, he ignored it. The second time, he told himself he was projecting. The third time, he leaned back in his chair and studied the dog. "You think that's why she was running?" he murmured. Alder's ears flicked. His gaze returned to the box. Silas waited another half hour, then crouched beside the couch. Iris. Her eyelids fluttered. She woke hard, instant and frightened, until she saw his face and Alder's shape on the floor. "You're okay," Silas said. He nodded toward the table. "Can I open the box?" She stared at it, then at Alder. The dog lifted his head but did not move. Slowly, Iris nodded. The metal lid resisted at first, rusted along one edge. Silas worked it gently with a flat tool from his pocket until it gave with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper and a child's careful effort at waterproofing, was a memory card. Beneath it lay a torn piece of lined paper with shaky handwriting, a set of coordinates. Silas recognized the area roughly. North side access, near the old dock zone. The words were smeared in places, but one phrase stood out enough to read. There was also a cluster of initials or abbreviations he did not understand. Silas glanced at Iris. She was watching his face the way people watch weather. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. She shook her head once. "Mom said keep it dry." Mom. The word landed quietly and heavily in the room. Silas took out his old laptop from the shelf near the desk. It was scratched, slow, and dependable. He sat at the table, memory card in one hand, while Alder rose and came to stand beside him, close enough for Silas to feel the dog's body heat against his knee. Outside, somewhere far across the lake, a boat engine started, then faded. Silas inserted the card. The screen flickered, searched, loaded. A video file opened. For a second, the image was all static and motion blur. Then a frame steadied just enough to show the inside of a dark structure near water. Corrugated walls, hanging chains, wet concrete, light reflecting in broken strips. The picture shook once, violently, as if whoever held the camera had turned too fast. Then the screen cut to black. Silas stared at it. Behind him from the couch, Iris made a small sound in her sleep and pulled the quilt tighter. Alder did not bark. He only stood there, eyes fixed on the dark laptop screen, as if he had been waiting all day for the room to reach this exact silence. Morning arrived soft and bright, as if the world had not spent the night whispering over a black screen and a memory card. Silas Rowan had slept in fragments. Not really sleep, more like drifting with one ear open and his mind circling the same few facts until dawn leaked through the curtains. A soaked girl in the reeds, a rusted tin box, coordinates near the old North Dock, a dark warehouse on video, a woman's voice that knew where he lived and what dog walked beside him. When he came out of the kitchen with a fresh mug of coffee, Alder was already awake. The German shepherd sat near the couch, yellow-black coat lit by the pale gold of early sun, his posture upright and still. He looked toward Iris, then toward Silas, then toward the front door. Not restless, just watchful. The dog's left ear, the one with the small notch, twitched once at a distant engine sound rolling across the lake. Iris was sitting up under the quilt, knees drawn to her chest, the rusted tin box in her lap again. She had changed into the dry clothes Silas gave her the night before, but she still looked small inside them. Thin shoulders, freckled face, wet hair now drying in uneven waves around her cheeks. There were shadows under her eyes that didn't belong on an 11-year-old. She watched Silas with the same guarded concentration as someone deciding every minute whether the room was still safe. "You hungry?" he asked. A shrug. "That usually means yes." Alder moved first, crossing to the couch and sitting beside her. Iris glanced at the dog and lowered one hand to the thick fur at his neck. Her fingers curled there, not gripping, just anchoring. Silas noticed she was less afraid when she touched something alive. He made oatmeal and toast because it was simple. Iris ate slowly. She flinched when a motorboat passed somewhere out on the water, spoon freezing midway to her mouth. Alder lifted his head immediately, eyes on her face, then pressed his muzzle lightly against her arm until her breathing steadied. Silas watched that happen and made a decision. He could not keep a child in his cabin and pretend that counted as a plan. But he wasn't ready to hand her to the first uniform who knocked either. He needed someone competent, local, and less likely to panic the situation. He needed Maeve. "Get your shoes on," he said quietly. "I know a vet." Iris blinked. "I'm not a dog." The corner of Silas's mouth almost moved. "No, but she's good with injuries, and better with scared things than most people." For the first time, Iris gave a look that was almost curious. Dr. Maeve Holloway's clinic sat on the edge of town in a low white building with cedar trim and flower boxes someone kept alive, despite the brutal winters. The sign out front read, "Holloway Veterinary and Wildlife Care," and below it, in smaller paint faded by years of wind, "Emergency calls welcome." Maeve herself opened the door before Silas could knock, twice. She was in her mid-30s, about 5'6" or 7", with a wiry, capable build that came from lifting unwilling animals and standing long hours. Her hair was chestnut brown and pulled into a low tie that was already coming loose, a few strands escaping around a face that was all angles softened by kindness. Her skin was fair but sun-touched, and her eyes, green-gray, sharp and steady, missed almost nothing. She wore a dark plaid flannel over a plain shirt, work pants with a stain near one knee, and waterproof boots. There was no wasted motion in her, no drama, just readiness. She took one look at Silas, then at Iris, then at Alder planted close to the girl's leg. "Okay," she said, voice calm as a level table. "That looks like a morning." Maeve stepped aside and did not reach for Iris. Smart. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Maeve. Nobody's touching you until I tell you what I'm doing first. Deal?" Iris looked at Alder. Alder looked at Maeve, tail low, ears forward. He didn't relax, but he didn't block her either. Iris gave a tiny nod. Maeve glanced at Silas. "Exam room 2. You too, Sergeant Shepard." Silas let out a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. Maeve called every anxious dog a rank eventually, but today the joke landed like a blessing. Inside the exam room, Maeve moved with practiced patience. She checked Iris's temperature, pulse, pupils, scrapes, and bruising. She narrated every step. "Cold stethoscope. Sorry, I'm checking your lungs." "Good. Breathe again." She asked simple questions and accepted simple answers. Her expression shifted, just slightly, when she saw the older bruising on Iris's upper arm, finger marks, faded yellow at the edges, not from a fall. She didn't comment aloud, only noted it on a pad and met Silas's eyes for half a second. Later, a boat engine revved outside on the main road toward the marina. Iris jerked hard enough to rattle the tray of bandages. Alder was on his feet before Silas moved. He stepped between Iris and the door, body broad and silent, then turned his head to look back at her. Not a guard dog in that moment, more like a witness. Maeve watched him carefully, then looked at Silas. He's reading her before she speaks. "Yeah." Maeve crouched a few feet away from Iris, lowering herself to the girl's eye level. "You're not in trouble," she said, "and you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But if something hurts inside, not just outside, I need to know." Iris's lower lip trembled. "I'm okay." Maeve nodded like she believed the effort, if not the truth. "All right, then today we deal with cold, cuts, and food. Big truths can wait an hour." Silas filed that away. Big truths can wait an hour. Maeve had always known how to leave a door open without forcing someone through it. When Maeve stepped out to get clean clothes from a donation shelf, Silas made the call he'd been postponing. Minimal details. Found minor. Safe. Needs documentation. Deputy Nolan Pike arrived in under 15 minutes. Too fast. The thought came cold and clean. Pike was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, with a body that had thickened with age but not gone soft. He stood around 6 feet, his posture still straight out of habit more than comfort. His deputy uniform shirt was tan-brown and neatly tucked, though his eyes looked tired in the way of a man who slept with his jaw clenched. His face was clean-shaven, deeply lined around the mouth and forehead, and his short hair, brown gone gray at the temples, was clipped close. He had the kind of voice people trusted because it sounded measured, reasonable, practiced. "Silas," he said, stepping inside. "Heard you found a kid." "Found her near the East Inlet." Pike's gaze moved to Iris, then to the rusted tin box on the chair beside her. The glance was brief, but too precise. Like checking inventory, Alder moved immediately. The dog slid in front of Iris without a sound, chest square, head level, eyes fixed on Pike. He didn't bare teeth. He didn't growl. He simply became a wall. Pike stopped. "Well," he said after a beat, forcing a smile, "I see introductions are going great." Maeve returned carrying folded sweats and a zip-up hoodie. She took in the room in one look, the deputy, the dog, Silas's face, and set the clothes down with careful casualness. "Deputy Pike," she said. "She's cold, exhausted, and easily startled. If you need a statement, keep it short." Pike nodded. "Of course." He crouched, keeping his hands visible. "Hey, Iris, I'm here to help. Do you know where your parents are?" Iris stared at Alder's shoulder and said nothing. Pike tried again, gentler. "Anyone hurt you?" A longer silence. Then Iris whispered, so soft Silas barely heard it. "Don't take me to the North Dock." Pike's jaw tightened. A flicker, gone quickly. "That place?" he said with a little laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Honey, North Dock's been shut down since the warehouse fire. Nobody's taking you there." Silas watched him too closely to miss the smoothness of it. Not surprise, deflection. Pike stood. "I'll file the found minor report and notify county services. You did the right thing calling." "Did I?" Silas asked. Pike met his eyes. "Don't let your imagination run wild because a scared kid said North Dock. This town's got enough ghost stories." He left with a polite nod to Maeve and one last glance at the tin box. The room felt different after the door shut. Maeve folded her arms. "He came fast." "Yeah." She looked at Iris, then at Alder, who still hadn't moved from his position. "And your dog dislikes him." "He doesn't dislike easy," Silas said. "He objects." Maeve blew out a slow breath. "That's not better." Silas spent the late morning moving through town in small circles, asking small questions. The lake town looked almost offensively cheerful under summer light. Kids ran between picnic benches with melting ice cream. Someone hung bunting near the marina for the weekend regata, and flower baskets overflowed outside cafes, where tourists took photos of pancakes bigger than their heads. Bright kayaks bobbed on the water. Wind chimes tinkled on storefront porches. It was the kind of place city people called peaceful because they only visited in July. Silas knew better. Peace and quiet were not the same thing. At the bait and tackle shop near the public launch, Hank Dorsey stood behind the counter sorting hooks into a tray. Hank was in his 70s, thin and weathered, shoulders bowed slightly by age but hands still quick. His face was leathered by sun and wind, his eyes pale and shrewd under the brim of a faded cap, and his gray stubble looked less like a style than a concession to comfort. He smelled, faintly, of tobacco, minnows, and old cedar. "Silas," Hank said without looking up, "you buying bait or trouble?" "Depends what's biting. That one a dry snort." Silas kept his tone easy. "North Dock Service Road still blocked?" Hank's hands paused on the hooks. "Why?" "Just asking." Hank finally looked up. Something old and tired moved behind his eyes. "Some things stay blocked because they're dangerous." He lowered his voice. "Some things stay blocked because too many people need them not to exist." Before Silas could ask more, a dark company truck rolled past the window with Vossler Outdoor Logistics painted in clean white letters along the side. Hank's mouth shut like a trap. He looked back down at the hooks. "You need night crawlers or not?" Silas left with a box he didn't need, and a worse feeling than when he walked in. On the way back to the clinic, Silas stopped by the marina overlook for no reason he could name. Alder, who had been quiet all morning, suddenly pulled toward the railing and stared across the sunlit water. Not at the open lake, but at a strip of shoreline farther north where the trees thickened and the old service road disappeared behind brush. The dog's body went still. Then Alder lifted one paw and held it there, suspended, not moving. Silas had seen that exact posture before in search work. Not panic, not aggression, recognition. At the same moment, a gull rose from that distant tree line, circling once as if startled from something hidden below. Silas felt the back of his neck go cold in the full summer sun. Alder lowered his paw, leaned into Silas's leg for one brief second, and looked up at him as if asking the only question that mattered. Now that you see it too, what are you going to do? By evening, Maeve had closed the clinic to walk-ins and locked the front blinds halfway down. Iris sat wrapped in a donated gray hoodie at the little break room table with a grilled cheese and tomato soup. She still spoke in fragments, but she had started answering when Maeve asked practical things. Whether she was dizzy, whether her chest hurt, whether she wanted the lamp on. Alder lay near her chair, chin on his paws, eyes half closed, but ears working every sound outside. Maeve joined Silas in the office with the memory card. "If this gets worse," she said quietly, "I need to know how bad we're talking." "Probably already worse than I hoped." She gave him a look that said she expected something unhelpful and was braced for it. Silas inserted the card and reopened the file. This time the video ran longer. The image shook as though recorded by someone moving in a hurry through a dark structure near water. Corrugated walls, wet concrete, a row of industrial drums without visible labels, then voices, male, angry, overlapping. "Manifest doesn't match the sample logs," said keep those separate. "If County tests the runoff." The camera jerked, catching a partial profile of a man near a loading bay. Mid to late 40s, tall, clean jacket, controlled posture. Even in grainy light, there was money in the way he stood. Maeve leaned in. "Who is that?" Silas didn't answer immediately. A truck door slammed in the video. The picture dipped. A woman's breathing came fast near the microphone. The lens pointed briefly at the floor, then up toward a slit of daylight and water beyond the structure. Then the woman whispered, voice strained but deliberate, as if choosing each word carefully while fear stood inches away. "If anyone finds this, don't take it to the local station. Find the man at the east cabin, the one with the shepherd. He works the rescue boats." Maeve turned toward Silas slowly. "She knew you." Silas stared at the frozen frame after the file ended. Not new, not personally, probably, but she had seen him, watched long enough to decide he was safer than whoever wore the badge. A strange ache moved through him, part grief, part responsibility, part the old familiar anger he spent years trying to keep folded and put away. Someone had looked at his life from a distance and chosen it as their last gamble. In the next room, Iris dropped her spoon. Alder was on his feet before it hit the floor. Silas stood too, every nerve suddenly awake. He stepped into the break room and found Iris rigid in the chair, staring at the clinic's back window. Maeve came behind him, slower but ready. "What is it?" she asked. Iris's eyes never moved from the glass. "That truck," she whispered. "Same color." Outside, at the edge of the parking lot, a dark company vehicle idled for 3 seconds too long before rolling away into the dusk. No one spoke until the taillights vanished. Maeve looked at Silas, all softness gone from her face now, replaced by something harder and clearer. "This isn't a lost child report anymore," Silas nodded once. Alder returned to Iris and leaned against her leg, solid and warm, while the evening light thinned over the town and the silence inside the clinic changed shape. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence before a decision. Silas did not sleep at the cabin that night. He stayed until dawn with Iris at Maeve's clinic, then drove the long loop road twice before sunrise just to be sure no one followed him out. It was the kind of precaution that looked paranoid from the outside and ordinary from the inside. He had learned, years ago, that danger usually announced itself in patterns, not gunfire, an extra car where there shouldn't be one, a face seen twice in different places, a question asked too smoothly. Alder seemed to share the mood. The German Shepherd rode upright in the back seat, ears moving at every passing engine, amber-brown eyes flicking from mirror to roadside and back again. His yellow and black coat caught the pale morning light, and the notch in his left ear made him look like a soldier with an old scar. He wasn't agitated. He was focused. There was a difference, and Silas trusted it. By mid-morning, they were at the secondary cabin in the woods. It belonged to a former teammate who now lived out west and used it only for fishing season. The cabin was smaller than Silas's place and set deeper in the pines, hidden from the road by birch, spruce, and a low rise of granite. The roof sagged a little on one side. The porch steps complained under weight, but it was dry, stocked, and most importantly, private. Martha Keene opened the door before Silas knocked. She was 68 and looked like she had earned every year honestly. Short, straight-backed, and quick in her movements. She wore a cream cardigan over a blue shirt, dark slacks, and soft shoes built for comfort rather than style. Her white hair was cut short and brushed neatly back from a face lined by weather, work, and too many winters. Behind thin reading glasses, her pale gray-blue eyes were sharp enough to make teenagers confess things they hadn't yet done. Martha had taught half the town in one generation or another. She had taught Lena Bell, too. "I brought bread, broth, and no opinions," she said by way of greeting, stepping aside. That seemed like the useful package. Silas liked her more every time she spoke. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine boards, old books, and something warm on the stove. Iris sat at the table in one of Martha's borrowed sweaters, sleeves rolled 3 times, hair brushed now into a loose braid. The sweater made her look even smaller. She held the rusted tin box in her lap like a living thing. When Martha reached to refill her tea, she asked no questions. She just set the mug down and said, "Honey, the honey's on the left if you want it sweeter." Iris nodded once. No flinch. Progress. Maeve arrived 20 minutes later in her clinic truck, carrying a small duffel and a box of supplies. She looked tired but composed, chestnut hair pulled back, green-gray eyes alert. She wore the same practical layers as yesterday, but today there was a gravity to her that had not been there before. She had crossed some internal line from helping with a strange morning to participating in a problem that could turn dangerous. "How is she?" Maeve asked quietly, after checking Iris's temperature and scrapes again. "Warmer," Martha said, still listening for doors. That simple sentence landed hard. Alder went to Iris and rested his chin briefly on her knee. She threaded her fingers into the fur at the base of his neck without looking at him. Silas noticed she did that whenever she needed to speak. He pulled a chair out and sat across from her. "Iris," he said, voice low and steady, "you don't have to tell us everything today, but if there's something that helps keep you safe, I need it." Her shoulders tightened. Martha moved to the sink, making enough noise with cups and spoons to give the child privacy without leaving. It was a teacher's trick, and a good one. Iris stared at the tea for a long moment. Then the words came in pieces. "My mom, Lena, she did numbers, bills, shipping stuff." Silas kept still. Maeve sat beside him, not writing anything down, just listening. "For who?" he asked. Iris swallowed. Not directly for him. For one company under his company, I think." She frowned, frustrated with herself. She said the names changed a lot. Vossler, Silas said. Iris's eyes flicked up, a small nod. She found things wrong, Iris whispered. Trucks and disposal didn't match. She said some papers said one thing, but the payment said another thing. She got scared after that. Maeve asked the next question gently. Did someone threaten her? The girl pressed her lips together, then nodded. Cars at night. Phone calls with no one talking. Rocks on our window. Her voice shook. One time our dog, before he died, he barked at the shed, and Mom made me stay in the bathroom with the lights off. Silas felt something in his chest turn to steel. Did your mother go to the police? He asked. She tried. Iris looked at him directly now, tears bright but not falling. She said they wrote things down, and then nothing happened. Martha stopped drying a spoon and set it aside very carefully. Outside, wind moved through the pines with the dry hiss of a whispered warning. Iris took a breath and continued, speaking faster, as if she had to get it out before courage left. The night we ran. She took me in the boat before sunrise. We didn't use the main ramp. She said we were going to meet someone who could help. Then there was another boat. We heard it before we saw it. Her fingers dug into Alder's fur. Mom gave me the box and pushed me toward the reeds and said, if we get split up, find the man at the east cabin, the one with the big shepherd. He helps people on the lake. Silas looked down at the tabletop. Lena Bell. He could picture her now in fragments. Brown coat at the fuel dock one spring. A polite woman in her 30s asking if he knew where to get an outboard bolt replaced. Maybe the same woman whose truck he'd winched out of slush near the public launch late in March. He had not known her name, but she had known enough about him to gamble her daughter's life on his routine. It did not feel like fate. It felt like a debt. Alder lifted his head suddenly and sniffed the air around Iris's old jacket hanging near the door. Then he crossed the room to the wall map, a topographic county map pinned beside a calendar from 3 years ago. He stood with his nose close to the paper, inhaled, then scratched once. Silas watched. Alder sniffed again, moved 6 inches north, and scratched harder, directly over a faded blue line marking an old drainage channel that fed toward the lake near the closed North Dock Zone. He's not reading the map, Maeve murmured, already understanding. No. Silas stood and traced the area with one finger. He's tracking scent associations. Her jacket, lake mud, maybe chemical residue. Wind direction too. Alder scratched again, then looked back at Silas and sat. For one strange, breathless second, the room went quiet enough to hear the wood stove ticking. Alder held Silas's gaze, then turned his head toward Iris. The girl was already looking at the same spot on the map. I saw a pipe there, she whispered, voice thin with memory. By weeds, metal grate over it. Mom said not to step in the water near it. No one had asked her that. No one had shown her the map before. Silas felt the hairs rise on his arms. It wasn't a miracle. It was trauma and scent and memory finding each other in the same room. But the effect of it landed like something holy, like a truth choosing the moment it wanted to be heard. Martha crossed herself without thinking, then pretended she had only adjusted her cardigan. Silas stepped outside to make a call. Ethan Kessler answered on the 4th ring, sounding like a man already annoyed by the day, and not ashamed of it. What? Ethan had been an Army engineer before becoming the county's environmental systems specialist, and both careers had left marks. He was in his early 40s, lean, slightly stooped in the shoulders from years over field kits and drainage plans. With sandy brown hair, he cut himself, and never quite evenly. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, and usually tense in the forehead, like he was perpetually waiting for bad math from other people. He wore wire-rimmed glasses when working and forgot he had them on. Silas trusted him because Ethan valued facts more than comfort, and once spent 16 hours in a blizzard helping reroute runoff to keep a trailer park from flooding. Silas gave him the short version first. By the time he got to video of drums near water and possible concealed discharge, Ethan had gone silent in the focused way that meant he was no longer irritated. He was interested. "Send me stills," Ethan said. "And if you took any water sample, don't tell me you used a jelly jar." Maeve handled it. A pause. "Good. Then maybe we all survive your decision-making." An hour later, Ethan was at the cabin with a battered field tablet, a messenger bag, and 2 sealed test kits. In person, he looked exactly like he sounded. Functional, no polish, boots muddy, jacket zipped wrong. He nodded to Maeve, squinted at the map, then crouched to let Alder smell his hand before entering the deeper part of the room. "Dog approves me," Ethan said. "That's comforting." Alder sneezed once and turned away. "Or not," Ethan muttered. Silas showed him the video stills. Ethan zoomed in, jaw tightening. "That piping bracket isn't permanent infrastructure. Looks like a temporary pump assembly. Wrong setup for a normal storage building." He pointed to a dark corner in one frame. "And if that's secondary containment, it's inadequate. If they're handling regulated waste near water, this is ugly." "How ugly?" Maeve asked. Ethan looked toward the window, as if measuring how much truth the trees could hold. Potentially criminal ugly. By noon, Silas had made another decision, one he knew was risky and probably the only way forward. They would go look in daylight, not to confront anyone, not to play heroes, just to verify the drainage line and the grate Iris mentioned, and get cleaner evidence for Ethan and, if needed, a state call. Martha stayed with Iris. When Silas hesitated at the door, Martha gave him the kind of look that had probably once silenced entire classrooms. "Go," she said. "I can boil soup and lock doors at the same time." Maeve added supplies to her bag. Ethan checked wind direction and marked a route on the map. Alder paced once, then stood by Silas's knee, ready. They approached the north side drainage area from the woods, not the service road. The day was bright and almost offensively beautiful. Sun flashed on open water, through the trees. Birds called from cedar branches. Wildflowers had begun to edge the trail in white and purple. It felt wrong, hunting for contamination in light this clean. Ethan moved slowly, reading the ground. Maeve watched the vegetation and animal sign. Silas scanned for people and vehicles. Alder worked low, nose cutting left and right, leading by inches rather than speed. They found the disturbed soil first, freshly turned earth under pine needles scattered to hide it. Then tire impressions from a heavy truck where no marked utility route should have been. Then, half hidden under brush and a rusted grate, the drainage channel Iris had described. The smell hit even Silas this time, solvent sharpness under wet mud mixed with machine oil. Maeve crouched, eyes narrowing. "No frogs," she said quietly. Silas looked around. She was right. In a wet ditch in June, there should have been movement, frogs, insects, tracks. The place felt biologically quiet in a way that was wrong. Ethan photographed everything with scale markers, then checked flow direction and took readings. "I need lab confirmation," he said, "but this is enough for probable concern." Maeve collected a sample with gloved hands and proper containers, labeling time and location while Ethan dictated coordinates. Alder stood over them, head up, ears shifting, guarding but not tense. On the way back, a private maintenance truck appeared on a side access lane they had not used coming in. Too close. Too timed. The driver, a thick-necked man in mirrored sunglasses, slowed just enough to study them before continuing. No logo on the door. Temporary plates caked in dust. Silas caught the detail and filed it away. No one spoke until the truck disappeared behind the trees. They knew someone was here, Maeve said. Or they were checking who came sniffing, Ethan replied, then grimaced at his own word choice and glanced at Alder. No offense. Alder ignored him. They took the long route back. The sun was lower by the time the cabin came into view through the pines, amber light slanting through branches and turning the porch railing gold. For 1 second, Silas felt relief. Then he saw the shape on the porch. Deputy Nolan Pike stood with his hat in one hand and the other resting near his belt, posture relaxed in the way men practice when they don't want to look like they're applying pressure. He had changed from his earlier shift shirt into a light brown jacket over his uniform, and his lined face looked more tired than before, as if the day had worn him down or something heavier had. Martha was visible through the window behind him, standing near Iris with one hand on the girl's shoulder. Alder stopped dead beside Silas. The dog's body did not go aggressive. It went rigid. Pike saw them and offered a restrained, almost apologetic smile. "Silas," he called, voice mild but carrying. "We need to stop doing this the hard way." Silas kept walking until he was at the foot of the porch steps, Maeve and Ethan a pace behind him. Pike's eyes flicked over the mud on their boots, the sample case in Ethan's hand, and Alder's focused stance. Then he looked back at Silas. "Give me the girl," Pike said quietly, and the softness in his tone only made the words land harder. "You're making this more dangerous than it already is." Deputy Nolan Pike did not move from the porch. He stood there with the kind of patience that looked almost courteous until a person noticed what it cost everyone else in the room. The late sun caught the lines in his face, deepening them. He held his hat low against his thigh, shoulders squared but not aggressive, as if he were trying to convince the world, and maybe himself, that this was still a conversation. Silas stopped at the bottom step. Maeve and Ethan came up behind him, close enough to help, far enough not to turn the moment into a standoff. Alder stood at Silas's left knee, yellow-black coat dark in the porch shadow, body rigid and silent. His ears were forward. His eyes never left Pike. Inside the cabin, Martha Keene remained by the table, one hand resting on Iris's shoulder. The girl sat very still, sweater sleeves over her hands, watching through the window with that same haunted concentration that made her look older than 11. Pike spoke first. "Let's all take a breath," he said. His voice was low and even, practiced from years of calming drunk tourists and neighbor disputes before they turned into paperwork. "I'm not here to drag anyone anywhere." Silas said nothing. Pike looked past him briefly at Ethan's sample case, then back at Silas. "You found a minor. You reported her. That part was right. But now you've moved her to an unofficial location, involved civilians, and started poking around a sealed area on rumor and fear." He let that hang. "You know how this sounds." Silas kept his tone flat. "I know how fast you arrived both times." Something shifted behind Pike's eyes, but his expression stayed composed. "Small town. We don't have traffic." Maeve stepped onto the porch rail side, arms folded, chin slightly raised. "She's injured, traumatized, and afraid of specific places and people. We're not talking about a runaway who missed curfew. Pike turned to Maeve, and for a moment some weariness showed through the uniform and the authority. Dr. Holloway, I don't disagree she needs care. I'm saying there are procedures for this. Child services, county intake, documentation. If something happens to her here, all of you are exposed. He was not wrong. That was what made him dangerous in this moment. Not because he sounded like a villain, but because he sounded like a man standing on the strongest pieces of truth while the weaker parts rotted under his feet. Ethan cleared his throat. No one's disputing process. We're disputing timing. Pike glanced at him. And you are? Ethan Kessler, County Environmental Systems. Ethan lifted the sample case slightly. And before you ask, yes, I know what proper chain of custody is, and no, I'm not handing field samples to anyone local until I know who's reading the reports. The porch went very quiet. Pike's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. That's a serious ditch, Ethan said, and it smells like solvent. Silas watched Pike carefully. The deputy did not react to the word solvent the way he reacted to the mention of who handled reports. That told Silas two things at once. Pike either knew more than he should, or he was trying very hard not to know. Silas, Pike said, returning to him, Iris needs formal protective placement. Tonight. Not after you and your friends decide you've solved a conspiracy. The word friends almost sounded like an insult. Silas looked through the window at Iris. What happens if I hand her over, and she's right about the North Dock? Pike took longer to answer than he should have. If she names someone, he said finally, we investigate. Like you investigated Lena Bell? That landed. Pike's face went still in a way Silas recognized from men hit where their armor was thin. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it. Martha opened the home. Doctor, before Pike could answer. She was small and silver-haired and utterly unafraid, cardigan buttoned to the throat like she had come prepared to attend either a church meeting or a war. Deputy, she said, the child can hear every word from this room, and if grown men are going to lie, I'd prefer they do it without an audience. Pike looked at her, and some of his posture softened despite himself. Martha. I taught you in 7th grade, she said. You chewed pencil erasers when you were nervous. You're chewing your cheek right now. Maeve glanced sideways at Pike, and sure enough, a muscle jumped along his jaw. For a second, Pike looked less like law enforcement and more like what he was underneath. A tired local boy who had spent too long trying to stand in front of a storm with one hand. Then Alder moved. The dog stepped past Silas, crossed the porch threshold, and went straight to the small table where Silas had left the old laptop bag. He stood over it and gave a low, controlled growl. Not loud, not explosive, but deep enough to vibrate in the wood floorboards. Every person in the doorway froze. Alder was not looking at Pike's hands. He was looking at Pike's face. Pike flinched, barely, but Silas saw it. Not fear of being bitten. Fear of what was on that laptop. The growl stopped as suddenly as it began. Alder sat down beside the bag and held Pike's eyes. Silas felt the room tilt into a new kind of certainty. Pike exhaled through his nose and put his hat back on. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, but the force had gone out of the performance. All of you. He stepped off the porch, paused by the rail, and spoke without turning around. If county gets a call before this is clean, they won't send someone better. They'll send someone faster. Then he walked to his cruiser and drove off down the tree-shadowed road. No one spoke for several seconds after the engine noise faded. Maeve was first. That was not a threat. No, Silas said. That was a warning. Martha stared at the road long after the dust settled. He looked like a man trying to carry two sides of a fence at once. Ethan muttered, "That's not a sustainable engineering model." Martha gave him a dry look. "You'll do." They moved fast after that. Ethan sat up on the kitchen table with his field tablet, sample notes, and the photos from the drainage channel. In work mode, he got narrower somehow, his shoulders hunching, his voice flattening. Every ounce of personality poured into accuracy. He marked the disturbed soil, tire tracks, grate position, and flow path on a digital county map. "I can't call the compound yet," he said. "Not through county lines. Too many eyes, too many automatic copies. But I can send one sample through a state lab contact under preliminary hazard review if I label it as suspected restricted discharge and omit exact coordinates for now." Maeve leaned against the counter, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. "Can they run it tonight? If I wake him up and ruin his marriage, yes." "That sounds promising," she said. Ethan glanced up, deadpan. "I don't mean my marriage." Silas almost smiled. While Ethan packaged the sample, Maeve spread out her own notes. She had started keeping a separate list over the last few months, not because she expected a criminal case, but because she was tired of telling herself the pattern was coincidence. "Look at this," she said, sliding the notebook toward Silas. 3 hunting dogs with unexplained liver inflammation, 2 with tremors, 1 older lab with seizures after drinking from marsh runoff, and that's just pets brought to me. I've also had calls about dead frogs and a fox behaving disoriented near the north tree line." She tapped a date column with a bitten-down fingernail. "It spikes after heavy rain." Ethan leaned over the notebook. "Runoff event pattern." Maeve nodded. "I'm not saying chemicals. I'm saying something is wrong in the water and animals are telling us before humans are." Silas looked at Alder lying near Iris's chair, eyes half closed but still tracking voices. The dog had done exactly that from the beginning. "Then this isn't just fraud," Silas said quietly. Maeve met his gaze. "No, it's poisoning by paperwork." The phrase sat in the room like smoke. Night came down clear and cold for summer. Around 9, when the cabin had settled into low lamplight and tired voices, a boat engine started somewhere out on the lake. The sound was faint at first, just a distant mechanical growl rolling over water. Iris went rigid. One second she was coloring in silence at the table with pencils Martha had found in a drawer. The next she was under it, knees to chest, hands over her ears, breathing in short, silent bursts like her body had forgotten how to exhale. Martha dropped to one knee at once but stopped herself from reaching in. Maeve crouched too, voice calm. "Iris, look at me. No one here is touching you. Just breathe." Iris couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on something none of them could see, pupils blown wide. Alder moved before any human could decide what to do. He lowered himself to the floor and crawled under the table beside her, folding his large body into the cramped space with surprising gentleness. He pressed his side against her shins and laid his head across her ankles, heavy and warm, pinning her to the present. For several long seconds, the only sounds in the cabin were the boat engine outside and the rattle of Iris trying to breathe. Then her fingers found Alder's collar. Her breathing broke. One sharp inhale, then another, then a sob that sounded almost angry. The engine faded into the distance. Iris buried her face in the dog's fur and whispered something too soft to hear. Martha put a trembling hand over her own mouth. Silas turned away toward the dark window for a second because his chest hurt, and he did not entirely trust his face. There was no miracle in the room, just a traumatized child and a dog choosing, with absolute certainty, where to place his weight. And yet everyone standing there felt the same thing. Sometimes grace arrived on 4 legs. When Iris finally came out from under the table, she was exhausted and embarrassed in the way children often were after fear had exposed them. Martha handled it beautifully. No pity, no fuss. She reheated the soup and told a story about a school fire drill in 1989 where she herself had hidden in a supply closet because the alarm reminded her of her husband's factory accident. "Courage isn't never panicking," Martha said, stirring crackers into broth. "Courage is what happens after." That gave Iris something to hold besides shame. Alder stayed close, tail resting still against the floorboards. Later, with Maeve sitting beside her and Silas across the table, Iris spoke again in fragments, but this time the fragments fit. "There was a small cold building," she said, eyes on the steam rising from her bowl. "Behind the old dock, not the big burned one, behind it. Mom called it the freezer shed, even when it wasn't for food." Silas leaned forward slightly. "Did you go inside?" She shook her head. "Once. A little. It smelled bad. Not rotten. Sharp." She touched 2 fingers to her nose. "And there were boxes and a noise like humming." "Compressor," Ethan murmured. Iris nodded without understanding the word. "Mom said they hide the stuff in one place and the real papers somewhere else. She said if they lose one, they still have the other." Maeve glanced at Silas. That matched the pattern on the memory card. Separate logs, separate manifests. Iris hesitated, then added, "There was a man there. He walked weird." "How weird?" Silas asked. She stood up to show them, putting one hand on the table and taking 2 uneven steps, the right leg dragging just slightly before catching up. "Like this, not old, just hurt before." Silas stored that too. Not a name, a gate. Outside, wind moved through the pines. No boat engines now, only branches. Ethan checked his phone and frowned. "State lab contact's awake and hates me, which means he's working." He looked at Silas. "I sent the flagged sample as preliminary restricted compound screening. No exact coordinates, no names. If anything pops, we move fast." Silas nodded. "How fast?" "Depends what pops." An hour later, Silas stepped outside to make a call he had hoped to postpone until he had more than suspicions. He used an encrypted app an old teammate had once insisted he install for the day your quiet life gets loud. Special Agent Dana Mercer answered without introduction. Her voice was clipped, controlled, unmistakably federal. "This is Mercer." Silas had never met her in person. He knew her only by reputation and one shared contact from his team. A former intel specialist who trusted very few people and trusted Dana enough to use the word clean. That mattered. He gave her the essentials in less than 3 minutes. Minor witness, possible environmental discharge, compromised local chain, video evidence, suspected private logistics operation connected to Northside dock property. Dana did not interrupt until the end. Then she said, "You did the right thing not routing this through local channels if you suspect contamination of process." Silas looked back through the cabin window at Iris curled against Alder on the couch, Martha knitting with furious precision, Maeve and Ethan bent over maps and notes. "What do you need from me?" "3 things before I can credibly pull interagency support without tipping your county." Dana said. Specific location confirmation. Clear images or video tying hazardous materials to an identifiable site. And assurance the child witness is secure and not being moved through official local custody. We can do that. Don't promise me what you can't safely do, Mr. Rowan. Silas watched Alder lift his head inside, ears turning toward the door as if he could hear Dana through the wood. We can do it, he said again, quieter. Dana paused, measuring him through the line. Then do not improvise contact with suspects. Preserve evidence. Keep your witness calm. I'll be standing by. The call ended. When he came back inside, Maeve read the answer in his face before he spoke. She believed you. She believed the pattern. Same thing tonight, Ethan said, eyes still on the screen. Near midnight, his phone buzzed on the table. Every person in the room looked at him. Ethan read the message once, then a second time slower. The color left his face in a way Silas had not seen before. Well? Maeve asked. Ethan swallowed. Preliminary hit. He looked up. Restricted industrial solvent markers. Not enough for final enforcement by itself, but enough for emergency concern if verified on site. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. This isn't ghost story contamination. This is real. Silas felt the chapter of the thing close in his mind. They were past suspicion now. Past instinct, past rumor, past the comfort of not knowing. On the couch, Iris was asleep at last, curled against Alder's side. The dog stayed awake, eyes open in the low lamplight, watching the room as if he understood the shape of what had changed. Silas looked at the map on the table, then at the rusted tin box, then at the people who had chosen to stay. The question was no longer whether something bad had happened near the North Dock. The question was whether they could gather proof before the people responsible erased it. And in the stillness after Ethan's words, with the pines outside and the lamp glow, inside, that felt less like a plan and more like a race. They left before sunrise, while the trees were still only shapes, and the lake was a strip of steel between them. Martha Keene stood in the cabin doorway with Iris tucked under one arm and a cardigan pulled tight against the morning chill. The old teacher looked smaller in the dim light than she ever did in daylight, but her spine was straight, and her gaze had that same iron certainty that made children tell the truth before they knew why. I'll keep the curtains half drawn, she told Silas, and the radio on low. If she panics, I know what to do. Iris said nothing. She wore the borrowed sweater again, the sleeves covering most of her hands, and she held the rusted tin box now like a keepsake instead of a shield. Her eyes went to Alder. The German shepherd stood beside Silas, yellow-black coat dark in the pre-dawn blue, chest broad, ears high, body angled toward the truck. He looked ready to work. When Iris whispered his name, he crossed the porch, touched her wrist once, with his nose, and returned to Silas without hesitation. It was such a small gesture that it broke Silas's heart a little. We'll be back before dark, he said. He did not add if all goes well. Everyone already heard that part. Maeve drove separately and met him at an old access turnoff 2 miles south of the closed north side zone. She wore a dark flannel under a weathered field jacket, hair tied back tight, boots mud-ready, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder with sample containers, gloves, extra batteries, and a trauma kit. Her face was pale in the early light, but her eyes were clear and steady. You look like you slept 20 minutes, she said. I got 25. That explains the optimism. Silas almost smiled. They reviewed the plan one last time by the hoods of their vehicles while the sky shifted from charcoal to gray. No confrontation. No heroics. They would confirm the freezer shed Iris described, document everything cleanly, recover anything portable that could disappear before a warrant reached the county, and transmit a first package to Dana Mercer. Ethan would stay remote on a secure call to guide evidence framing and site angle documentation. Alder paced once, nose high to the wind, then moved to the tree line and looked back. "Yeah," Silas said. "We're coming." Alder did not take the easiest route. That was the first thing Maeve noticed. Instead of leading them straight north through the open service gap, the dog cut west along a line of granite outcrops, then down through a dry gully choked with birch saplings and fern. He paused often, not from uncertainty, but to test the wind. His movements were deliberate, nose to air, then ground, then air again, working a pattern Silas recognized from search days. "He's avoiding open sight lines," Silas murmured. Maeve glanced at him. "He knows that?" "He knows exposure smells wrong when there's pressure around. And he's tracking. Layered scent. Fuel, solvent, lake mud." Silas watched Alder angle toward the lee side of a boulder. "He's choosing where the wind carries information." Maeve looked at the dog with renewed respect. "So he's not leading us to a place. He's following the story of the place." Silas nodded. "Exactly." They moved through morning beauty that felt almost insulting. Sunlight spilled between the pines in long, holy bars. Warblers flashed yellow in the branches. The lake glittered through breaks in the trees like a promise no one had earned. Then the smell changed. Machine oil, damp metal. Something sharp underneath, chemical and synthetic, thin at first, and then stronger where the ground dipped. Alder froze beside a broken concrete footing hidden in weeds, then turned sharply and led them behind a stand of alder shrubs to a structure half swallowed by neglect. The shed was smaller than the burned warehouse remains Iris had described from memory, tucked behind it, and partly shielded by rusted sheet metal fencing. It might once have passed for a maintenance cold room. Now it looked like something people stopped mentioning on purpose. Its corrugated walls were patched in places. The roofline sagged. A condenser unit hummed low, too new-looking for the rest of the building. One side door hung slightly crooked on repaired hinges. "Freezer shed," Maeve whispered. Silas nodded and motioned her to start recording before they touched anything. She pulled out her phone and a compact backup camera, then opened Ethan's secure call. His face appeared in a small window, narrow, serious, glasses already sliding down his nose. He sat somewhere fluorescent and cluttered, field manuals stacked behind him. "Slow pans first," Ethan said. "Wide shot, then approach. Narrate date and time. If this goes legal, context matters as much as content." Maeve did exactly that. Voice steady. Silas checked the door. Unlocked. Inside, the air was colder. Then outside, but not food cold. Chemical cold. Working machinery, bad insulation, and the wrong kind of storage. Rows of industrial containers lined one wall, white and blue drums with fresh labels slapped over older residue marks. Several labels were wrinkled, crooked, and too clean for the grime on the barrels. Pallets sat stacked with shrink-wrapped boxes stenciled with shipping codes. The codes did not match from one side to the other. A clipboard hung near a workbench, and beneath it a pocket notebook full of handwritten times, partial plate numbers, and initials. Maeve filmed everything while Ethan guided angles. "Hold on that label. Closer. Now the drum seam. Good. Pan to the pallet codes. Freeze there." Alder moved through the room with his head low, tail level, nostrils flaring. He ignored the obvious stacks and went straight to the back, where the compressor unit vibrated against the wall. He sniffed along the baseboard, then pawed once at a wood panel behind the machine. Silas heard the hollow note before he trusted his own hope. "Maeve, get this." She came over, camera trained on his hands. Silas killed the machine power switch, waited, then pried at the panel edge with a flat tool from his belt. The board shifted with resistance, then came loose. Behind it was a shallow compartment wrapped in plastic sheeting. Inside, a USB drive in a zip bag, a ledger book thick with carbon copy pages and tabbed dividers, and an internal memo packet stamped with a Vossler subsidiary logo and marked with initials instead of signatures. Maeve looked at him, eyes wide. "That's not sloppy corruption. That's backup corruption." Ethan's voice crackled from the phone. "Don't joke, just document. Open each item on camera enough to identify, then bag." Silas did, hands steady in the old way. He felt the weight of the ledger and understood at once why Lena had run. This wasn't rumor. This was architecture. As Maeve panned, across the hidden compartment, Alder suddenly spun toward the open door and stiffened. No growl, no bark. Just instant, total focus. Then he crossed the room and stopped beneath a hook by the entrance where a rain slicker and a pair of tall rubber boots hung drying over a tray. He inhaled once, sharply, and recoiled. Not in fear, but in violent recognition. His hackles lifted. He pawed the floor beside the boots, nose working hard, then turned and stared at Silas with an urgency so raw it felt like speech. Maeve lowered the camera a fraction. That smell. Silas was already there, crouching. The boots were spattered with old mud and a dark sheen of fuel residue. The raincoat carried lake water, stale solvent, and something else he remembered from Iris's jacket after they pulled her from the reeds. A metallic tang buried under mud and cold. Not magic. Transfer. A chain of contact. Whoever wore these had been in the same night, the same water, the same fear. Silas looked up slowly, pulse kicking hard. They were there when Iris ran. Alder did not move. In the doorway, the morning light seemed to dim by a shade. They should have left then. Silas knew it, and some part of him had already started the retreat sequence. Bag evidence, grab notebook, out through the west side brush, long route back. He was reaching for the ledger when a voice spoke from outside. "Careful with that. It's harder to replace than the drums." Silas turned. Gideon Vossler stood just beyond the threshold, one hand resting casually on the doorframe as if he were stepping into his own boathouse. In person, he was taller than the grainy video suggested, mid to late 40s, around 6'2", broad through the shoulders in the way of a man who used to be athletic and now paid to maintain it. His jacket was dark, expensive workwear cut to look local, not corporate. Clean boots, clean nails, hair dark with silver at the temples, a face made for reassurance in public meetings, strong jaw, controlled smile, cold eyes. Two men stood behind him on the gravel. One was thick through the chest and neck, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses, arms folded. The other was leaner, late 30s maybe, with a narrow face, stubble, and a slight hitch in his right step when he shifted his weight. Iris's limping man. Silas felt Maeve go still beside him. Vossler looked past Silas to the camera in Maeve's hand, then to Alder, then back. Nothing in him read surprised, only disappointed. "I expected County eventually," he said. "I didn't expect you, Rowan." Silas kept his body angled between Vossler and Maeve. "Then you know my name." Vossler's smile widened by a degree. "This is a small region. You fix rescue boats, pull drunks off rocks. People talk." His gaze dropped briefly to the evidence in Silas's hands. What you're doing right now can still be a misunderstanding. Maeve found her voice. Those labels are fraudulent. Those labels are temporary. The runoff channel. Compliance issue, Vossler said smoothly. Messy? Yes. Malicious? No. He stepped one pace closer, palms visible. The gesture was almost gentle. My company keeps this town working through winters your city friends don't survive on postcards. Freight, fuel, tourism logistics, seasonal storage. You think there aren't hard decisions behind that? You think everything stays clean in places where people still need jobs in February? Silas heard the pitch for what it was. Not innocence, but moral leverage. Vossler kept going, eyes never leaving him. A man with your background should understand this better than anyone. Sometimes you accept a controlled loss to prevent a collapse. Sometimes you carry ugly choices so families can eat. It was a calculated blow, and it landed exactly where Vossler intended, on the old scar tissue. Silas had heard variations of that argument in different uniforms, different countries, spoken by men who used the word necessary when they meant convenient. He stood very still. You don't get to borrow my past to explain your poison. Something hardened in Vossler's face. Behind him, the limping guard shifted and reached toward his belt. Silas moved first. Maeve, go. He grabbed the ledger and USB, shoved the memo packet into Maeve's evidence bag, and snapped a rescue smoke flare from his side pocket. He carried two in the truck out of habit. He struck one on the concrete edge and pitched it low toward the doorway. Thick orange smoke exploded into the cold room, filling the threshold and turning Vossler's polished expression into a smear of color. Maeve coughed, grabbed the notebook from the wall, and ran. Alder shot after her, then wheeled back when Silas didn't immediately follow. Move! Silas barked, grabbing the remaining evidence and kicking the hidden panel back enough to slow a glance. They burst, out the rear side where rusted sheet metal leaned against a retaining wall. Silas used the flare smoke and the terrain exactly the way he'd used fog and dust in another life. Break line of sight, change elevation, deny target certainty. Behind them came shouting, then the crunch of boots and the clipped order Vossler couldn't keep calm anymore. Don't lose them! Maeve was fast but not trained for slick drainage edges. They cut behind the shed and down a narrow berm above the matted reeds. Her boots slid on wet clay. She went sideways with a sharp cry. Alder hit her before gravity did. The dog lunged, jaws catching the heavy cuff of her jacket near the wrist, bracing backward with all four legs. Not enough to lift her, but enough to stop the slide into the ditch long enough for Silas to grab her harness strap and haul her up. For one breathless second, all three were tangled together in mud, smoke drifting behind them through the trees. Maeve stared at Alder, stunned and muddy and alive. Okay, she gasped. I officially owe him steak. Put it in writing, Silas said, hauling her forward. They cut through the rock line Alder had used coming in, the dog now leading hard and low, choosing cover over speed. Twice Silas heard men crashing through brush behind them, but the sound faded whenever they crossed stone or moved downwind. By the time they reached the vehicles, Silas's lungs burned and Maeve's hands were shaking. No one was in the lot. He got the evidence into sealed bags, photographed the seals and timestamps, and sent the first encrypted package to Dana Mercer from the secure app. Still images, coordinates, a short narrated clip, plus a text. Site confirmed. Fraud labels, hidden ledger/USB recovered, contact by Vossler. The reply came 2 minutes later. Received. Preserve originals. Do not return alone. Silas read that twice and pocketed the phone. Too late for the last part, Maeve said, catching her breath, as she wiped mud off her camera housing. They drove back by separate routes again. At the cabin, Ethan met them at the table with cables, adapters, and the kind of concentration that made him rude by accident. Martha got Maeve a towel without asking questions. Iris stood in the doorway to the back room, pale, eyes fixed on the mud on their clothes and the orange residue on Silas's sleeve. Alder went straight to her, pressed in at her hip, and only then let his own breathing slow. Silas set the recovered body camera on the table. It was cracked, water-damaged, and missing part of its mount. Ethan turned it over in his hands like a surgeon evaluating a bad fracture. "Don't expect miracles," he muttered. "No one here does," Martha said quietly. It took almost an hour to coax a charge and pull a partial file. The room dimmed around the glow of Ethan's laptop. Maeve sat wrapped in a blanket, hair coming loose, one scraped palm bandaged where she'd hit the berm. Silas stood with one hand on the chair back in front of him. Iris sat on the floor beside Alder, the dog's shoulder against hers like a wall. The recovered video stuttered, glitched, recovered. Darkness, shouting, the scrape of metal, a flashlight beam skipping across stacked crates. Then Lena's voice, closer this time, shaking but clear enough to raise the hair on every neck in the room. "If I don't make it out..." The image jerked. A man cursed somewhere off camera. Lena continued, breathless, as if speaking into the device while hiding it at the same time. "Please protect Iris. Don't let them turn my little girl into a line item. Don't let her become one line in a report and nothing else." The video cut out mid-sound. No one moved. Iris's face folded before she made a noise. Alder leaned into her as she cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just the broken, private crying of a child who had been holding herself together with borrowed strength. Silas looked at the black screen and felt the stakes settle into something heavier than danger. This was no longer only about proving what Vossler had done. It was about making sure Lena Bell had not vanished into paperwork the way men like him expected people to vanish. And in the silence after her voice, that obligation felt as solid as the dog at Iris's side. By late morning, the lake town looked like a postcard trying too hard. Blue pennants snapped in the wind along the marina railings. Folding tables lined the park road with lemonade, grilled corn, handmade lures, and raffle baskets wrapped in cellophane. Children in bright life vests ran in circles while parents shouted names and sunscreen warnings. A brass band from the high school tuned up under a white canopy, each wrong note bouncing off the water like a joke. It was the annual summer regatta day, the kind of local tradition people used as proof that a town was still good. Silas Rowan stood at the edge of it all in his worn olive-gray tactical shirt and old combat pants, boots dusted with gravel, military watch tight on his wrist, and felt none of the comfort the scene was built to sell. Alder stood beside him, yellow and black coat gleaming in the noon light, ears up, body quiet and alert. The German shepherd looked like a working dog trying to understand why danger had chosen to hide inside balloons and music. Maeve was 2 steps away, holding a hard case and a shoulder bag, her chestnut hair tied back tighter than usual. She had traded her clinic flannel for a darker field jacket and plain jeans to blend in, but there was no hiding the tension in the set of her jaw. She had spent the early morning building a clean evidence packet with Ethan's help. Time-stamped stills, labeled samples, drainage photos, palette codes, the ledger images, and a short recorded statement from Iris that showed only the lower half of her face and her hands gripping the rusted tin box. Ethan himself was off-site in his county office annex, feeding technical notes and metadata through secure channels to Dana Mercer's team. He hated crowds and ceremonies with equal passion, and it showed in the irritated voice memo he'd sent an hour earlier. Do not let anyone touch the containers if you can avoid it. And for the love of all sane process, get plate photos before the scene gets trampled. Martha Keene arrived with Iris just before noon. Martha wore a pale cardigan despite the summer heat, sensible shoes, and the expression of a woman who had decided fear could wait until evening. Iris stayed close at her side, small in a borrowed windbreaker and baseball cap pulled low. She looked pale, but steadier than she had been the night before. Alder glanced at her once, then went back to scanning the crowd, as if he understood his job had widened. Silas crouched to Iris's level. You stay with Martha and Maeve unless I say otherwise. If anything gets loud, you move away from the dock and toward the church tent. You remember that? Iris nodded. Her fingers tightened around the strap of the small bag that carried the tin box. Is he staying with you? She whispered, looking at Alder. For now, he stays with me. That hurt her, and she tried not to show it. Alder solved the problem for all of them by stepping over and pressing his shoulder briefly against her knee before returning to Silas's side. Martha huffed softly. This dog has more manners than half the council. Silas looked toward the council tent. That's not a high bar. Dana Mercer's last message sat unread in his pocket because he had read it too many times already. Team in position. We do not move until trigger is visible and documented. Keep your witness protected. That was the second layer of the plan. Dana's phrase, not his. Layer 1. Protect Iris and preserve originals. Layer 2. Force a public, documentable exposure of active movement tied to the contaminated site, with enough witnesses and cameras that no one could bury the first minutes. It was ugly. It was risky. It was the only way left that didn't depend on local silence turning honest overnight. At 12:17 p.m., Deputy Nolan Pike approached from the marina side without his cruiser. He wore plain clothes for the first time in the story Silas had known him. In dark work pants, a light-collared shirt rolled at the elbows, and an old brown jacket despite the warmth. Without the uniform, he looked more like what he was underneath, a broad, tired man in his 50s with a lined face and a history of bad sleep. His hair was clipped short, gray at the temples. His hands were empty when he stopped, and he held them where everyone could see them. Maeve stepped half a pace closer to Iris. Pike saw it and nodded once, accepting the judgment. I asked for 5 minutes, he said to Silas. That still on the table? Depends what you brought. Pike looked around at the crowd. Families, tourists, volunteers pinning race numbers, a local reporter adjusting a microphone near the stage, and lowered his voice. Not enough to fix what I didn't stop. He swallowed hard. Enough to help you finish it. Silas said nothing. Let him work for it. Pike took a folded packet from inside his jacket and handed it over. Photocopies. I kept the originals hidden at my brother-in-law's shop. Vehicle logs from the North Access Road, partial maintenance waivers, and a complaint memo that never made county filing. He glanced toward Iris and looked away quickly. The memo mentions odor reports and animal sickness. I buried it. Maeve stared at him. Why? The answer took effort. My son got into pills after his back surgery, Pike said, voice rougher now. Debt to the wrong people. Vossler made it disappear. He laughed once, bitter and brief. Not for free. Nothing's free. He met Silas's eyes then, and the shame there was real enough to make anger complicated. I told myself I was protecting my family. Then I told myself I was protecting jobs. Then I told myself if I pushed too hard, someone worse would step in and I'd lose all visibility. He looked down at his hands. That's how people like me turn into furniture while bad men move through the room. Silas unfolded the packet and scanned the top pages. Dates, plate fragments, times, a county complaint heading with no filing stamp, a notation about runoff odor after heavy rain. Useful, very useful. Why now? Silas asked. Pike's eyes flicked toward Iris again. Because if kids are getting exposed, there's no lie left big enough. Maeve studied him a long second, then nodded once. Not forgiveness. Permission to stand nearby. Pike let out a breath that sounded old. The regatta announcer's voice crackled over loudspeakers, cheerful and too loud, introducing the junior canoe heats. At the same time, Alder's entire posture changed. No bark, no growl. He lifted his head, went rigid, and pivoted toward the service lane behind the equipment tents, where delivery vehicles rolled in and out all day. Then he stepped forward 3 paces and stopped with one forepaw slightly raised. The exact alert position Silas had learned to trust before he trusted his own eyes. Crowd noise blurred around the edges. Silas followed the dog's line of sight and saw an unmarked refrigerated box truck inching toward the exit lane, temporary event placard taped to the windshield. Equipment/ice delivery. Too ordinary. Too well-timed. Alder's nose worked once, then he looked back at Silas with that same hard focus he wore in the reeds the morning they found Iris. Silas felt the moment lock into place. Maeve, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the truck. Get your camera up. Pike's face changed as he saw where Alder was pointing. That truck wasn't on the volunteer list. Silas was already moving. He stepped into the lane with the calm of a man who knew panic spreads faster than truth. The truck driver hit the brakes hard enough to jolt the cab. A few people turned, annoyed first, curious second. Phones began to rise before anyone understood what they were filming. Silas planted himself in front of the grill, Alder beside him, and lifted one hand. Engine off! The driver was a broad man in a baseball cap and mirrored sunglasses, the same thick-necked type Silas had seen near the north side access route, though not necessarily the same face. He leaned out the window. What the hell are you doing? I've got clearance. Then you won't mind waiting for verification. Pike came up on the passenger side, voice sharp in a way Silas had not heard from him yet today. Kill the engine. Now. The driver looked from Silas to Pike to the gathering crowd. He made the wrong decision and reached for the gear. Alder barked once, one explosive strike of sound that froze 3 people at once, including the driver. The engine died. Someone in the crowd said, "What's going on?" Another voice answered, "Is that Silas Rowan?" Then the local reporter pushed closer with a mic and a camera operator who smelled a story. Maeve was already filming from an angle that caught the truck, Silas, Pike, and the event banners behind them. Smart. Context and identity in one shot. Pike put a hand on the door. Step out. The driver hesitated, then climbed down slowly, muttering under his breath. Up close, he was younger than Silas expected. Late 20s maybe, jaw tight with fear more than aggression. Silas moved to the rear cargo doors. You got keys? Company lock? The driver snapped. Talk to my boss. I plan to. Pike held out his hand. The driver didn't move. The crowd thickened. Children got pulled back by parents. The brass band stopped tuning. Even the lake seemed louder in the sudden gap left by human noise. Then a familiar voice cut through it. "Deputy Pike!" Gideon Vossler called, approaching from the council side with the smooth urgency of a man trying to look inconvenienced rather than alarmed. "What are we doing?" Vossler wore the same polished local style as before. Dark jacket, clean boots, public smile. 2 security men moved behind him. One of them was the limping guard. Silas saw Iris go still near Martha and Maeve. Vossler followed Silas's gaze, saw the child, and recovered so fast most people would have missed the calculation. He spread his hands to the crowd. "Folks, this is a misunderstanding involving a delivery contractor and a man who's had a difficult few days." His eyes slid to Silas. Trauma can do strange things to judgment. He was trying to label Silas before the truth labeled him. Pike spoke before Silas could. "Open the truck, Gideon." The use of his first name in public carried history like a knife. Vossler's smile thinned. "On what authority?" "On mine, until someone bigger gets here." Vossler looked at him then. Not at the crowd, not at Silas, at Pike. The look said more than any speech. "You were supposed to stay bought." Pike did not look away. Silas heard sirens in the distance. Faint, but coming. Good. Dana had moved. Vossler heard them too and shifted his stance half an inch. "This is reckless," he said, louder now for the crowd. "You're stopping commerce in the middle of a public event, because a former soldier and a dog got spooked." Alder's ears snapped toward the cargo doors. He stepped close and sniffed along the seam, tail rigid, nostrils flaring hard. He scraped once at the lower latch. Phones rose higher. "Open it," Maeve said, voice steady, camera unwavering. The driver looked trapped in every direction. Pike held out his hand again. Keys. This time, the driver surrendered them. Silas unlocked the cargo doors and pulled. Cold air spilled out first, then the smell, chemical sharpness under melting ice and cardboard. Inside were stacked coolers and wrapped cases meant to look like event supplies. Behind them, partially hidden under tarps, sat industrial containers with fresh labels. Too fresh. One had a corner peeled where another stencil showed beneath. Ethan's voice came through Maeve's earpiece so loud everyone nearby heard him. "Get the labels. Close up. Then the pallet sheet if there is one." There was. Clipped to the interior wall was a transport sheet with shipment codes. Silas read the top line and felt the pieces click. The code prefix matched one from the ledger they'd pulled from the shed. "Pike," he said quietly. Pike climbed up enough to see. His face drained. "That code's in the logs I gave you." Maeve filmed the sheet, the labels, the mud caked in the truck's wheel wells, and the reddish clay lodged in the rear step tread that matched the north side drainage berm. Vossler took one step forward. "Stop recording and step away from my vehicle." A security guard lunged, not at Silas, but toward Maeve's camera hand. Before Silas could pivot, Alder launched. Not wild, not mauling. He hit the guard low at the thigh and hip, redirecting momentum just enough to send the man sideways into a folding barrier instead of into Maeve. The guard swung an elbow reflexively. Alder yelped and dropped back with a limp in his front leg. Silas was on the man a heartbeat later, driving him to the ground and pinning his wrist while Pike shoved through and secured the other arm with a speed born from older instincts than his guilt. "Don't move!" Pike barked, voice cracking like his old authority had finally remembered itself. The crowd exploded into noise, shouts, children crying, the local reporter talking too fast into her mic, someone yelling for EMS, Someone else yelling, "That truck stinks." Then the sirens were no longer distant. 3 vehicles pushed through the side access lane almost together. State environmental enforcement, county support, and an unmarked dark SUV that stopped hard near the stage. Dana Mercer stepped out of the SUV with a badge in one hand and a folder in the other. In person, she was taller than Silas expected, maybe 5'9" or 5'10", built, lean and strong in plain, dark field clothes that looked more practical than official. Her hair was dark and pulled back. Her face was angular, composed, and unsentimental. The face of someone who had spent years walking into rooms where everyone lied for a living. Her eyes moved fast and missed nothing. Truck, labels, crowd, Iris, Pike kneeling on a guard, Vossler trying to regain control. She did not raise her voice, but somehow everyone heard her. Federal Task Coordination, step away from the vehicle. This scene is now under Emergency Environmental and Criminal Review Authority, pending immediate evidence preservation. Vossler turned toward her, charm already reloaded. On what basis? Dana opened the folder and read like a blade cutting cloth. Prior transmitted evidence of suspected restricted discharge activity. Field-verified imagery of mislabeled industrial storage linked to North Dock property. Preliminary state lab screening indicating restricted solvent. Markers. Public safety concern at a crowded event site. Minor witness under protected non-local supervision pending formal transfer. The last line made several heads in the crowd turn toward Iris and Martha, and just as quickly away when Martha stared back at them with schoolteacher disapproval. Dana looked at Silas only long enough to confirm he still held the evidence bag. Then she looked at Pike. "You stay?" she asked. Pike's jaw worked once. "I stay." Dana nodded. "Then help me keep this clean." More units rolled in. A helicopter thudded somewhere over the lake, close enough to shake the pennants and make everyone look up. The bandstand flags snapped hard in the rotor wash. Alder stood again, despite the limp, pressing himself against Silas's leg. Silas crouched and ran a hand down the dog's shoulder, checking for damage. Tender, but stable. The dog's ears stayed on the truck. "Good work," Silas murmured. Around them, the town had gone quieter than a crowd that size should ever be. People stared at the opened cargo truck, the mislabeled containers, the officers, the cameras, the bright regata banners fluttering over a scene they had spent months, maybe years, not wanting to understand. The lake behind it all shone almost white in the afternoon sun, and for the first time, the silence in town was not the silence of avoidance. It was the silence after witnessing. The first week after the regatta felt less like victory and more like weather after a storm. Bright in places, wrecked in others, and full of things people pretended not to notice until they had to step over them. By Monday morning, yellow tape wrapped the freezer shed near the old North Dock. State environmental trucks came and went. County workers who had once avoided that road now stood in reflective vests beside portable lights, while federal agents carried boxes out in numbered bins. The drainage grate Silas and Maeve had found was photographed, sampled, and documented by people with clipboards and chain of custody forms. The illegal discharge route was no longer rumor, no longer just a smell after rain. It had become evidence. Gideon Vossler's company offices stayed open for one day after the festival. Then the parking lot filled with marked vehicles and plain, unmarked sedans. By the end of the week, the local paper, usually proud to lead with fish derby winners and school board bake sales, ran a front-page headline large enough to make hands shake over breakfast. Fraud, environmental violations, witness intimidation, false transport labeling, contract reviews pending. The town read it in silence, then argued in parking lots. Some said Silas Rowan had done what no one else was willing to do. Some said he had humiliated the town in front of cameras and tourists. Both things, in different ways, were true. Silas did not spend much time in town that week. He stayed between the cabin, Maeve's clinic, and the quiet roads that wrapped the lake, moving through days that had suddenly become full of statements, timelines, and careful retellings. Dana Mercer's team took possession of copies, then originals, then sworn clarifications. Ethan Kessler gave technical summaries with the pained precision of a man who hated attention, but hated contaminated water more. Martha Keene sat beside Iris through 2 interviews and corrected a state. Investigators' tone exactly once, which was enough. Deputy Nolan Pike was suspended by Wednesday. Silas heard it from Dana, not gossip. He's under review for suppression of complaints and failure to escalate hazard indicators, Dana said over the phone, voice as even as always. His cooperation is on record. It matters. It doesn't erase what he buried. Silas stood on the cabin porch while she talked, looking out at the lake. He knows that. A pause. Dana spoke again, quieter. Men like Pike usually break one of 2 ways when shame catches them. He chose useful. When Silas later saw Pike in person, it was outside the county building. No badge, no cruiser, no crowd. Just a tired man in a work jacket carrying a paper cup and looking 10 years older than he had at the regata. Pike didn't ask for absolution. He handed Silas a final page of notes, old odor complaints and 1 plate number he had missed, and said, "I should have done this before a kid. Got scared of engines." Then he walked away before Silas could answer. That, Silas thought, was probably the most honest thing Pike had done in months. Maeve treated Alder at the clinic the same afternoon as the regata, and every day after that for the rest of the week. The injury turned out to be a bad strain and bruising along the front shoulder and leg, plus a shallow scrape where the guard's impact had glanced off him. Painful, but not catastrophic. Alder hated the reduced movement and tolerated it with the offended dignity of a professional put on desk duty. Maeve handled him with the calm competence that had become one of the few things Silas trusted without argument. She would crouch beside the exam table, chestnut hair falling loose from her tie, green-gray eyes narrowed in concentration, and say, "No heroics. You are not helping me by pretending that doesn't hurt." Alder would look at her like she was unreasonable, then hold still anyway. One afternoon, while Maeve changed the wrap and checked range of motion, she said, "He's healing on schedule." Silas, leaning against the wall in his worn olive-gray shirt, asked, "And the limping?" "Will improve." She glanced up at him. "Yours too, if you ever let your shoulders come down from your ears." "I'm standing normally." "You're standing like a man waiting for incoming mail from God." He looked at her for a second, then actually laughed. Small, surprised, real. Maeve blinked like she'd startled a wild animal. "Well, there it is." "What?" "Proof you can do that." The laugh was gone as quickly as it came, but something softer remained behind it. Iris stayed mostly at Martha's house for the next several days, because Martha's little place felt safer to her than the cabin once investigators started coming and going. Martha lived in a neat white home with lace curtains, old school books stacked in the hallway, and a kitchen that smelled permanently of tea and cinnamon. She left lamps on in the late afternoon because Iris disliked dark corners now. She also kept a radio playing low in the evenings, so sudden sounds wouldn't own the silence. Trauma did not leave just because adults finally believed the truth. Iris still startled at outboard engines. She still refused to walk near the public dock alone. Twice, Martha said. She woke from sleep and checked the window locks before remembering where she was. But she also began eating better. That part Maeve noticed first. Her appetite comes back when Alder's nearby, she told Silas one evening. Her nervous system reads him as safety. It's not a cure. It's a bridge. So Alder, on his leash and under strict anti-heroic movement orders, spent a lot of afternoons stretched across Martha's braided rug while Iris did homework, drew in a spiral notebook, or sat quietly with one hand resting on his side to feel him breathe. 3 days after the regata, after a long clinic visit and too many phone calls, Silas brought Alder back to the east cabin just before sunset. The sky was clear, the lake bright as hammered copper, and the wind soft enough to carry pine and wet stone without the old chemical edge that had haunted the shoreline for months. For the first time since Silas had known him, Alder stepped onto the porch, circled once, and lay down in the sun without choosing a defensive angle. No ear cocked toward the road, no body held halfway upright in readiness. He exhaled, lowered his head across his paws, and went fully asleep. Not dozing, not listening, sleeping. Silas stood in the doorway and watched the rise and fall of the dog's ribs in the orange light, and felt something inside himself loosen by 1 degree, small enough no one else would have noticed, large enough to change the shape of the evening. It struck him then, quiet and simple, that healing sometimes announced itself with less noise than fear. The question of Lena Bell did not stay unanswered for long. Dana called on Friday with a voice that was still controlled, but less hard around the edges than usual. "We found her." Silas gripped the porch rail. "Alive?" "Yes." The word hit him like a hand to the chest. Lena had been located in a small private care facility 2 counties over under a different intake name, sedated heavily for what records described as acute distress and confusion. Dana's team now believed she had been pressured, isolated, and misrepresented as unstable after the night on the lake. Not a clean kidnapping, something uglier and more bureaucratic, a paper burial. "She's weak," Dana said. "Dehydration, exhaustion, chemical exposure possible, but she's alive and coherent in short intervals." Silas closed his eyes. When Iris was told, she cried so hard she laughed in the middle of it. Martha sat with her. Maeve held the phone. Alder leaned against Iris's knees and accepted tears on his fur like part of the assignment. Lena wasn't ready to travel immediately, and the first reunion happened by video call under a caseworker's supervision. The screen quality was poor. The connection lagged. None of it mattered. Lena Bell looked older than the woman in the body cam voice. She was in her 30s but carried the exhausted fragility of someone who had been forced to survive too many days in fear. Her hair, dark blonde and tied loosely back, had gone dull at the ends. Her skin was pale beneath bruised-looking shadows under her eyes. But when she saw Iris in Martha's kitchen with Alder beside her, she straightened in her chair like someone remembering where her soul lived. "Iris girl," she whispered, and then she was crying too. Silas stepped out of frame and let them have the center of the room. Later, when the call ended and Iris fell asleep on Martha's couch with her face still damp, Martha looked at Silas and said, "You can build a church out of paperwork if you know where to stamp the lies." He thought about Lena hidden under a false name, about reports, signatures, and quiet men in offices. "Yeah," he said, "and you can bury one too." The town meeting came the following Tuesday. It was supposed to be about tourism damage control. It became something better. People packed the high school gym with folded chairs and defensive expressions. Some came angry. Some came curious. Some came because silence had become heavier than attendance. The council sat at a long table under fluorescent lights, and for a while the conversation went exactly as badly as expected. Lost revenue, bad press, outsiders overreaching. We should have handled it ourselves. Then Ethan stood and explained the preliminary water maps. He was a poor public speaker and a very good engineer. He stumbled over greetings, forgot to make eye contact, and then calmly showed, with charts and plain language, how runoff pathways worked, why the ditch mattered, and how exposure zones overlapped with areas where children swam and dogs drank. Facts did what charisma could not. Maeve followed him and spoke about animal cases. No theatrics, just records, dates, symptoms. I can't prove every sick dog in this county drank from that runoff, she said. I can tell you the pattern stopped being random a long time ago. The room shifted. Then Hank Dorsey stood. He wore his old cap in his hands, not on his head. The tough old bait shop owner looked suddenly narrower under the gym lights, his weathered face stripped of lakefront swagger. He cleared his throat twice before words came. I knew there was a smell up there, he said. Not every day. Rain days mostly. I told myself not my land, not my problem. Told myself if I talked too much and the papers made a mess of it, folks would stop coming to fish and my grandkids' braces wouldn't get paid. He swallowed. That was cowardice with a practical hat on? No one laughed. Hank looked across the gym toward Silas. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. It was not the kind of apology that fixed anything. It was the kind that allowed a room to start. By the end of the meeting, volunteers had signed up for shoreline cleanup days, sample monitoring support, and a Citizens Water Watch committee Dana's team didn't ask for but quietly appreciated. The town was still divided, but it was divided in the open now, which was progress. The first cleanup day dawned bright and breezy. Martha handed out gloves and black trash bags with military efficiency. Maeve ran a table for pet and wildlife exposure guidance. Ethan, in a hat he clearly hated, explained what not to touch if found near the north runoff route. Even Pike came late and stayed at the edge, helping stack bottled water without asking to be seen. Silas moved along the shoreline with Alder on a short lead, keeping the dog out of contaminated zones and away from Hunt's overexcited children who wanted to pet the hero K9. Alder tolerated attention in small doses and retreated to Silas's side when it became too much, favoring his healing leg only slightly. By afternoon, the lake looked different, not fixed, not forgiven, but attended to. That mattered. As the crowd thinned, Iris walked over from Martha's station holding a folded piece of paper. She had a life vest on because Martha had insisted, and a pencil tucked behind one ear like a tiny carpenter. For you, she said to Silas. He crouched and opened the paper. It was a drawing in colored pencil, simple, uneven, careful in the places that mattered. A bright lake. A little cabin with smoke from the chimney. A tall man beside a German shepherd, with one ear marked darker than the other. The dog was drawn slightly too large and somehow exactly right. At the bottom, in blocky handwriting, she had written, Silas read it twice. He looked up at Iris, then at Alder, who was watching both of them with half-lidded, patient eyes, as if human emotion was noisy but acceptable. Thank you, Silas said, and his voice came out rougher than he expected. Iris nodded, serious as a judge. Mom says we can come by after she gets stronger. Silas folded the drawing carefully, like evidence of a different kind. Across the shoreline, Maeve was packing up bandage boxes and pamphlets, hair loose in the wind. She glanced over and called, "Don't crease that. It's probably the most accurate report anyone's filed all month." Silas looked at Alder, then at the bright water, then at the people still working with trash bags and gloves under a sky that had witnessed everything and kept shining anyway. There were things force could stop. There were other things force could never heal. This town had not been saved by one confrontation, one camera, one badge, or one man deciding to be brave after years of being tired. It had been pulled back, messily, painfully, by a child who survived long enough to be believed, by a mother who refused to let the truth die with her, by people who finally chose to speak after silence stopped feeling safe, and by a dog who could not say a single word but knew every time when human beings were standing in the wrong direction. The lake kept what it kept. The rest, people had to choose not to abandon. In the end, this story reminds us that truth does not always come with power, titles, or loud voices. Sometimes truth survives in the hands of a frightened child, in the courage of a mother who refuses to give up, and in the loyalty of a dog who keeps leading people back to what is right. The lesson is simple, but powerful. Silence can protect comfort for a while, but only courage can protect what truly matters. One person asking the next question, one person choosing not to look away, can change an entire town. And maybe that is one of the quiet ways God works in our lives. Not always through thunder, not always through miracles we can explain in one moment. Sometimes God sends help in ordinary forms. A neighbor who speaks up, a stranger who stops to help, a child who keeps holding on, or a faithful animal who senses danger before we do. Sometimes grace looks like protection. Sometimes it looks like truth being exposed. Sometimes it looks like a second chance. In everyday life, many of us face moments when it would be easier to stay quiet, ignore the warning signs, or assume someone else will step in. But this story challenges us to listen more carefully, care more deeply, and act with integrity even when it costs something. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share what it meant to you in the comments. Have you ever seen a moment that felt like a miracle, a warning, or God's hand guiding you through someone or something unexpected? Please share this video with someone who needs encouragement today. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about courage, loyalty, healing, and hope, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next one. May God bless each person watching, protect your family, guide your steps, heal what is hurting, and give you the strength to do what is right when life asks something hard of you. Amen.